Amazon is usually admired for its massive scale, obsession with serving customers, and founder Jeff Bezos' relentless entrepreneurial spirit. What doesn't get discussed often is the management principles and strategies that are the backbone of this organization, the tenets that provide the infrastructure on which Amazon has built its empire. However, Amazon's management philosophy and organizational tactics and strategies played a critical role in getting Amazon to where it is today, and continue to be one of the keys to its ongoing success. The company's approach to everything from launching new businesses and benchmarking progress to fueling innovation is both awe-inspiring and daunting. I'm Jane Singer, and welcome to A Seat at the Table. Each week, I sit down with leading executives, entrepreneurs, authors, and innovators who share their experience, expertise, and insights about the future of business. Few understand the inner workings of Amazon's management principles better than John Rossman, a former Amazon executive who led the development of the Amazon marketplace in its formative years. He worked with Jeff Bezos and other senior members of the company's leadership as they implemented management concepts and tactics that were at least as innovative and groundbreaking as the company's business model itself. John understands Amazon's unique business principles so well that he wrote a book about them. Today, John joins us here on A Seat at the Table to give us an insider's view of Amazon and to discuss his new book, The Amazon Way. Before we get started, if you're looking to develop knitwear collections that are bursting with creativity, then SPINEXPO is the place to go. It's the primary exhibition for yarns and knitwear. The fair is a rich resource featuring well-edited, high-quality collections as well as cutting-edge technical innovation. Not to mention outstanding trend information that cannot be found anywhere else. You can learn more at spinexpo.com. That's www.spinexpo.com. There's also a link in the show notes. And check out our website. You can find all of the previous episodes of A Seat at the Table, the show notes, news about our upcoming masterclass series, and lots of other useful information. You can find it at seat.fm. That's www.seat.fm. FM because it's a podcast. Now let's sit down with John and learn about what Amazon does differently and why it works. I'm just delighted to have you on the podcast, John. And yeah, I read your book, and it's packed with useful information and a lot of insights. Amazon is talked about all the time and been written about a lot, but you bring an interesting perspective, having worked there and been there during a very formative period.
Yes, I was at Amazon from early 2002 through late 2005, and it was a very formative time at Amazon. A couple of things going on. The stock had gone from a high of $109 down to a low of $5. When I started, it was $12. The company had just $1 billion of cash and short-term receivables. And we were being doubted by a lot of external naysayers relative to the business model and our execution. So that was one dynamic going on. But the other dynamic that was going on was that we started to see ourselves as both an e-commerce retailer and as a platform company. And a platform company is a company that builds useful tools that others use, but also we would use at Amazon. And the marketplace, which is what I helped lead and launch, is an example of that. That's the strategy from which businesses like AWS sprung from, which is build tools that we need, but have external customers for them. And so it was a real interesting dynamic. The leadership principles that I write about in the Amazon Way, they weren't codified at that point. They weren't written down, but we were using them and practicing and figuring out our mechanisms. Like, what are the things you do in order to live up to these principles, to put them into practice? And so it really was an interesting time. It was obviously a much smaller company. So the first holiday that I was at Amazon, so this would be holiday 2002, that quarter was the first $1 billion quarter at Amazon. Today, Amazon's a roughly $400 billion organization. So they have days that are over $1 billion in revenue. Obviously, a very different company, but the way we went about our work that's the template for how things still happen at Amazon. I'm always testing my understanding with people at Amazon who have recently left Amazon. Do we still write out ideas this way? Do we still think about metrics this way? Do we still do bar raiser interviews this way? Like all the mechanisms and everything. And I think that's really been one of the secrets of Amazon's success is a consistency that can be passed to a much bigger organization, that although it's a very big organization today, they still have an entrepreneurial spirit. They still have accountability. They still have a small team ethos. And that's what lets them keep their speed and their fun and their aggressiveness up.
I think that's really interesting. When you look at it, there's so many aspects to how Amazon is run that you talked about in the book. I think that obviously we don't have time to talk about all of it, but I think Amazon is famous for being customer obsessed. And in your book, you mentioned that of the 500 metrics for which leaders are accountable, nearly 80% of those were customer centric. Many companies talk about customer service. What do you think Amazon does differently?
That's a big question. There's a ton of things that Amazon does differently. Relative to metrics, most companies like to keep their metrics pretty simple, pretty high level. And they really use metrics to, in some way, pat themselves on the back. We're doing a good job, right? We're green. And they're very reluctant to show the signals, the noise, where they're imperfect. Amazon is the exact opposite in every single one of those aspects. One is you always are adding more to your metrics, but you have to design them. You have to think of a cascade of metrics so you can start with the top and then easily navigate down. And the other thing is metrics are there to tell you something. And if you just measure to averages or measure to the middle, your metrics aren't telling you something. So you always have to figure out, how do I zero in to find the noise? And guess what the noise shows you? The noise shows you where you're not perfect yet. So you use metrics as a way to highlight the issues. And so you don't start off by congratulating yourself. You start off with the humble notion of, hey, this is where we failed. And I have the numbers to show where I failed, where my service, where my team didn't do the job. And here's what we're doing about it. And so it very much is a always better mentality. And you use metrics to be the engine, the fuel into that fire. And like I said, I think metrics are one area where Amazon is different than most other companies because they are always striving for better, faster, cheaper, more predictable, better customer experiences.
It's a good point because in most other companies, you are measured by those metrics. And it really is a measure of success or failure. And that failure is not looked at in a way of, it's failing, but this is what we're going to get better. It's you're failing and maybe we should replace you.
Yeah, and there certainly are those types of metrics involved, but it comes to focusing more on the inputs, the things we're more in control of in order to get to the outputs that we want. And those are the things you focus on every day. And then once in a while, you take a look at the big output metrics and you go, okay, where are we? Do we have the right strategy? Do we have the right team? Do we have the right plan? Do we have the right leadership? But you don't focus on those all the time. You focus on the controllable inputs. And that's another area where Amazon is unique. So you mentioned the first leadership principle, which is customer obsession. Well, the 14th is called deliver results.
Right.
And it focuses on inputs and deeply understanding the inputs that we are more in control of to get us to the outputs that we want. And so Amazon spends a tremendous amount of time in describing and debating what are we proposing to do and how do we propose to get there. So they have a much better understanding of their roadmap of what they're going to do. And then they really focus on those inputs so that you're always in control of the situation versus most organizations. They rush through their planning efforts. They focus more on outputs, finances, users, adoption, things you're less in control of. and they don't have clarity as to what are we going to do in order to get that. And so they tend to have a little bit more of a victim mindset because they aren't all clear about how we're going to achieve these outputs that we want. And so I think that's a complementary thing to add, which is much more focus on inputs. There's a good management technique out there called OKRs, objectives and key results, that is very much, it has this supportive notion of objectives, which tend to be longer term goals that we have. And then the key results are shorter term items or steps or things we need to do that we're more in control of. I work with a lot of my clients on their planning processes, especially around innovation and growth, so new things. And we use that mindset of controllable inputs to get to the long-term outputs in order to articulate what we're trying to achieve and to elicit good debate.
That's an interesting way of looking at it. And I think that what you've been talking about in terms of how Amazon is structured from a leadership point of view, from a metrics point of view, it makes me wonder, was Jeff Bezos' biggest contribution the visualization of a platform, right, the original Amazon concept, or was it the management structure that he brought? Because both were unique. I think the management structure is probably unique even now, but the concept of a platform was so unique, and the concept of a marketplace was so unique.
That's the type of question I think you could argue so many different things that he's contributed, and which one is the biggest is hard to do. The biggest could just be he made a bet to start Amazon, right? You could argue that with fair justice. But I think of all of Jeff's attributes, it's the willingness to learn along the way and to be making bets all the time. As I mentioned, when I was at Amazon, those were stressful, hard days. We weren't being celebrated the way that Amazon gets both celebrated and vilified today. We were being doubted, and we had doubts ourselves. But Jeff operated the exact same way. It's like he was optimistic, he was upbeat, he was demanding in that leaders needed to know their business and what they were doing to improve it. And that's where he had high expectations of us. He operated in the same way when business wasn't great in normal terms relative to how they operate today. And so I think that consistency and optimistic mindset, and that we are here to serve our customers and to invent on behalf of our customers, that's what got Amazon. And he was willing to learn along the way. He learned a lot of operational techniques from some of the great leaders that came into Amazon. And so he was willing to incorporate a lot of other perspectives and areas of expertise into it. He didn't have a high source of it has to come from me or I know everything. He's, humble in that way, but he would test ideas and everything and really understand them.
That's really interesting, because it's not often that you see leadership that does it to the extent that Jeff Bezos has. You pointed out that Amazon doesn't watch what its competitors are doing, unlike what most other companies do. So how does the competition figure into Amazon's business strategy?
I would turn that statement just a little bit. They pay attention to their competitors, but they obsess about their customers. And ideas can come from everywhere. Learnings can come from everywhere. Signals can come from everywhere. But you really draw your inspiration of what should we do from your customers and understanding the job that they're trying to get done. And that's where the inspiration and the mission comes from, is from your customers. And so there's that word obsession is really important. And there are definitely companies that are competitor obsessed. And Amazon has just chosen to be customer obsessed. That doesn't mean you don't pay attention to your competition. You'd be a fool not to pay attention to your competition, because you can learn a tremendous amount from them, but don't make that your mission. At least that's Amazon's point of view on that.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, because I think that too many companies are really narrowly focused on the competition and pay little attention to the actual customer. Now, you had said that Amazon uses feedback from customers to drive innovation. What are some of the best examples of this?
Some of the best examples are real early on of just understanding what sort of questions, what sort of contacts, what sort of frustrations do customers have? Why are they contacting you with something? And really getting at the root cause of why does somebody have a question about something and what can we do to eliminate it? And so much of Amazon's self-serve approaches, the whole where's my stuff category of capabilities from Amazon came from that customer feedback. More recently, understanding that part of the hesitation of buying online is the real and perceived friction of returning items. And so what has Amazon done? They have continued to innovate on making it easier and easier to return items. A pretty counterintuitive mindset. Most people want to make it a little bit of a friction point, if not a big friction point, to actually cancel or return something. Amazon goes the exact opposite way. We're going to make it as easy as possible because their long-term bet is if customers know that it's easier to return or cancel an item, guess what? They're going to trust you more. So they're going to buy over a long period of time. And so that's a good example where Amazon is learning from their customers, taking the feedback from their customers and using that as inputs into innovation.
That's such a great way to look at it. And I think that you're right. That's one of the biggest sticking points in terms of buying online is that skepticism of what if I don't like it, or what if it doesn't fit? And the fact that Amazon allows you to return things for free, it's a big investment on their side. But on the other hand, you're right, I shop on Amazon too. And the fact that you can return it definitely encourages you to buy stuff, maybe even stuff you don't need.
It's not just send it back. You can, in the US, you can drop it off at a Kohl's department store. You can drop an item off at an Amazon bookstore. You can drop an item off at a Whole Foods. And you don't even have to put it in the box. You just drop the item off. You don't have to have the receipt or anything. It's both the big concept as well as the little details of removing friction. And friction is the hidden tax, the hidden things we ask customers to do that in a perfect world, they really wouldn't have to do. And so they're always trying to remove the minor points of, we call it friction, which is the little details that you ask customers to do that really aren't necessary or that you could take on their behalf.
Yeah, I think that's really important because most companies, as you said, look at it from what's better for me as the company. How do I make it difficult for people to quit? How do I make it difficult for them to return stuff? It has to have all the packaging. It has to have the original box and all of that. And so eventually you figure, oh, the heck with it, I'm not going to send it back. But then you don't also want to go back there and buy from them again. Reverse logistics is a huge expense, but they see it as an investment. You made a point in the book, which I thought was interesting, that Amazon invents and simplifies. What exactly does Amazon do? And how could other companies realistically apply this approach to their business? Because Amazon does have the luxury, you might say, that it doesn't have that pressure to meet quarterly results in the same way that most other businesses do. And it also has leadership, right, that's completely long-term focused.
I think that last point is very true. They definitely still have high objectives relative to meeting their results. But the third leadership principle is invent and simplify. And it talks about the eagerness to find new ways to serve customers, and that making things simple is as hard and as important as invention. And I think that's, to me, is the surprising part of this leadership principle, is and simplify is seen as important as invention. But Amazon has always viewed their journey as an exploration, and they're always willing to look and to try new concepts. But the secret of it, and one of the points that any size team can take from Amazon, is how do you rationalize a concept before you try it? And so that trying to get to clarity, as exact an understanding of what you're proposing, who the customer is, what's the unique superpower that you're going to give to the customer? What would it take to do that? Where are the risks? What are the challenges in doing it? Amazon has this approach of writing those things out and then thoroughly reading and debating those as a team before they proceed on the concept. And so it's very much a measure twice, cut once mentality versus so many other organizations. They get aligned on a vague notion of an idea, but because they haven't clarified the exact notion of that idea or how they're going to proceed on it, they proceed on it in a sloppy, non-experimental approach. They don't win. The concept doesn't win. It's just not good enough. And then they get reluctant to try new ideas. And so again, it's an orientation of focusing on the inputs of how to experiment. And if you do that consistently, you don't know which of these ideas is always going to work, but you know that from a portfolio standpoint, you're going to win because you're going about it in the right manner. And so it's that confidence in understanding that if we focus on the inputs of how we experiment, we're going to win over the long term. And that's the notion that any organization can learn from, is how do you actually experiment within your business and understand that that's a different playbook than your normal operating playbook, right? How you make decisions, how you predict, how you forecast, how you evaluate performance, all of those things in your standards. I am a mature business, I'm operating a business. Those approaches are the exact things that will kill and squash an experimentation culture, an experimentation portfolio. So you really have to understand the difference of those. This is a lot of the work that I do with big organizations, which is helping them understand how to separate out a portfolio and have an innovation agenda, and all the both big things and little things we need to do different to have success in that innovation portfolio, regardless of whatever size, whatever the amount they can commit to it. That innovation portfolio has to be dealt with in a different way.
That's really interesting. And I think that so many companies would really benefit from having someone like you look at what they're doing and help them move in that direction. Because like you said, people have a way of doing things, and we tend to do things the way we do them because that's what we feel is the right way.
And what most people learn in a traditional management career track and in a traditional MBA is that operation science, management science approach. And again, those things, while they look similar to some of what you do in a experimentation or innovation portfolio, actually so many of the beliefs and the techniques from that are the exact opposite of what you want to do. And that's what people have to complement to their existing notion of how to manage it. It's a different playbook.
Yeah, for sure. Amazon hired you to establish its marketplace. Can you talk a little bit about what it took to get the marketplace going from zero to a thriving market?
We're going to take a quick break now, and then we'll be right back.
We were hiring when we were making 50 to 100K monthly losses.
And why? Welcome to episode 1.
I can't think of a single founder who's been around for a decent amount of time in business who hasn't had their tunnel of year. This was that year. We're going to be okay, yeah, Sheree. Some are going to hear this and think, you TDP. But hear me out. You only have to do the math to understand that very soon we were $500,000 down.
Yeah. So the marketplace business today, I think thriving is maybe a little bit of an understatement. The Amazon marketplace is someplace between 55 and 65% of all orders at Amazon. And so the marketplace is third-party selling at Amazon. And again, it's a massive part of the business. I played a key role in launching that platform, that business. In 2002, 90% of Amazon's business was books, music, video. We used the marketplace platform to add 12 different categories over 2 years. So we started with apparel, sporting goods, home, electronic, gourmet, musical instruments, like a whole slew of all the categories that you know of Amazon today. What's interesting about that, so in 2002, that was actually the third attempt at Amazon for a third-party selling strategy. And the other two hadn't worked. One was called Z Shops, one was the auctions platform. They just weren't the right thing for the Amazon customer or the Amazon business. And so even then, Amazon was showing they were willing to iterate on concepts. And so one of the things, I'd say the number one thing that what it took to launch the Amazon marketplace was patience and persistence. When we launched the marketplace business in 2002, it wasn't clear even for a year or two that it was going to be successful. It took several years for customers to understand that you could come to Amazon for a broad set of categories, not just books, music, video. It took time for us to fill in through adding tens of thousands of sellers to have authoritative selection. And then it really took the addition and the advent of the Amazon Prime membership and a capability called FBA, which is Fulfillment by Amazon, that allowed third-party sellers to have Amazon fulfill their items for them, and that made them Prime eligible. It was the combination of those things that allowed Marketplace to really become the engine for growth that it became. And that really started manifesting itself in the 2007, 2008 era, which not coincidentally is when the Amazon stock, so Amazon stock was essentially flat for a 7 or 8 year period of time from, we'll call it 2001 through 2008. And it was really in 2008 that it started to make this steady up to the right progress that we continue to see from the stock. That really came with two things starting to be real businesses. One was the Amazon Marketplace, and the other was AWS, Amazon Web Services, which is the cloud business of Amazon. Both of those things started to become big businesses in 2008. And I think that's highly correlated to the Amazon stock rise that basically what everybody remembers today.
Yeah, absolutely. But it was really the marketplace that you started that fueled all of this.
I was one of the key people that helped start the marketplace business. Yes. Yeah. There was a lot of leadership, but yeah, I led a big piece of the launch efforts there at the marketplace.
What were some of the biggest challenges in getting it started?
The two that I'll talk about, one was internal naysayers, right? This had been the third attempt of a marketplace business. As I mentioned, we were resource constrained in a way that's hard to describe today. And we were bringing competition to some degree to our internal merchants at Amazon. And so there was internal naysayers, but Bezos just was like, we're doing this, get on the train or not. And that was really needed. And I think the other challenge was talking brands onto the platform and demonstrating to them that we were going to be good, not just from an additional revenue standpoint, but that we would represent their brands well and everything. And so it took a lot of convincing and hand-holding and helping them understand what does it take. A lot of these organizations, they weren't used to shipping orders directly to customers back at that point. And so helping them understand the operational obligations they had, because our promise to the customer was buying from a third party would be as trustworthy and have the same experience as buying from Amazon, the retailer. So we held our third party sellers to extremely high operational obligations. And so we had a lot of work to do. So those were two of the biggest challenges we had.
Oh, those are pretty big challenges, especially when you've got the scale in terms of the number of third-party sellers on the platform that you had to deal with.
And it's those constraints, those forcing functions that really helped us build better approaches, better strategies, better mechanisms like that. It's those constraints that forced us to innovate.
Right. You wrote about a tactic at Amazon called the future press release. What was that?
We've already talked about the notion of writing upfront to understand what your proposal is, what your idea is, what you want to launch. So one of the writing exercises you do upfront is called a future press release. And A press release, by definition, is a lighter weight, 1 page or less announcement, but you don't write it at the announcement of the launch of your capability. You write it at a point of time after you've had success. So call it a year or two after your launch. And what you start with is, why did your customers love this new product or this new service or this new capability that you're proposing? And you have to describe it in a way that is very discernible. Like you can feel it, you can taste it, you can really understand the differentiation that you're bringing to it. Then the next part of the future press, you talk about, what did it take to do this? What were the hard problems that we had to solve in order to do it? You're obviously writing this to an internal audience, right? So it's not really a public press release. So you would talk about the real things that you would have to solve for. You didn't talk about how you solve for them because you haven't done it yet. You just outlined like, hey, here are the big boulders, the sensitive topics, the real things we have to do. And just writing that out and having it available to the broader organization got everybody aligned to, okay, this is the mission we have to do. And then if you give that press release to one leader in the organization, and I was the person who carried that press release, and you say, hey, everybody works for that mission, ergo, we all report to that person relative to accomplishing this mission, you help speed up the organization, right? You knock down organizational boundaries and you allow for better execution relative to that mission. So a future press release is one of the go-to techniques that when I'm working with a team on, well, what is exactly this idea? It's amazingly difficult and enlightening to see, just trying to put simple articulation to what are the winning facets of this concept that are truly going to differentiate. All of a sudden, your ideas become crisper. They become better. You have better debate on real strategy aspects. That's what the future press release is. And it's one of, I'll call it, easier tools or techniques from Amazon to incorporate into work because it's so well defined. You don't have to have broad organizational in order for the technique to be effective.
Right. Yeah, I think you could take everything that you've shared from Amazon, everything you've outlined in the book, and it could become a business school program.
You're right. It's not quite the mission that I've undertaken, but that was essentially my insight. So I left Amazon in late 2005. I was working with clients. I got to do a lot of work at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And it was several years. It was about 6 years after I left Amazon, and a client of mine pulled me aside and said, John, you do a real nice job of taking the little strategies, anecdotes, points from Amazon and inserting them into our work. And he challenged me. He goes, I think you ought to write a book about it. And that's what kind of put me on this trail. I'd never really thought about being an author or writing a book about it, but they are such well-defined, repeatable tactics, but there are a lot of them. And so it takes some wisdom to know which ones to use. And like any technique, form can really be important. And so it's pushing to get to the real mission for why are we doing this versus just the mechanics of what you're doing is part of the unlock that teams and leaders have to learn. And that was really my mission with the book and the speaking I do and the advisory work I do is to figure out your own version of some of these techniques and how do you create a real playbook for how you innovate, how you grow, and how you operate in the digital era.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot to learn. And even though you have codified it so well in your book, you could read that book many times because there is so much depth to it. Just one last question, John. What's the biggest learning you took away from your time at Amazon?
For me, personally, it's really been the willingness to always be adding to either your vision for your business or for yourself and being willing to take steps to progress to them. And so I came away with both a self-confidence in how to do that, but also just the notion that if you don't do that, either as a business, as a team, or as an individual, you are essentially limiting yourself and you put yourself at higher risk by not taking chances versus lowering your long-term risk by taking more chances. And so that wasn't just the environment that I grew up in. It wasn't what I was exposed to when I was growing up. And so I was like, oh, I have both an opportunity, but I need to continue to progress myself. And so that was, for me personally, the biggest thing that I came away with. And I came away with a rich catalog of great techniques that I could use both with myself as well as with my clients. I'm like, how do you articulate and make change happen?
I think that's really well said. And I think that's something that many companies are facing right now. The need to really look at what they're doing and understand not only how they can go forward, but maybe a different strategy for going forward, like what you have shared in this podcast.
Thank you.
Now, I know a lot of people will want to read your book, and I am assuming it's available on Amazon.
It is. It's available in paperback, in Kindle, and in Audible versions at Amazon. Yeah, the Amazon way.
Okay, that's wonderful. I'm going to include a link to that in the show notes. And where can they find you if they'd like to reach out to you?
Yeah, I think the easiest way is LinkedIn.
Okay.
Is the easiest way to find me. But my blog is theamazonway.com. So the-amazon-way.com. And I also have a Substack newsletter, a weekly newsletter to continue to explain some of these techniques. So if you go to Substack and search John Rossman, you can subscribe to my newsletter there. It's called the Digital Leader Newsletter.
Okay, that's great. And like I said, I'll make sure the links are all in the show notes as well. John, thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure talking to you, and I totally enjoyed reading your book. I've learned a tremendous amount from the book and from talking with you.
Jane, it was nice meeting you, and thank you for your preparation and expertise.
Oh, thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode of A Seat at the Table, join me each week when I sit down with leading executives, entrepreneurs, educators, and authors who share their insights, experiences, and vision for the future of business. And make sure you visit SPINEXPO. From trend information to technical innovation, SPINEXPO is the primary exhibition for yarns and knitwear. The fair provides well-edited forums featuring high-quality products that are bursting with creativity. To learn more, go to spinexpo.com. That's www.spinexpo.com. You can also find a link in the show notes for this episode. Before you go, if you're looking for a concise view of key shifts, opportunities, and risks in global sourcing, then check out the current situation in sourcing. You'll find a link in the show notes. And don't forget to check out our podcast website, where you can find all of the previous episodes of A Seat at the Table, the show notes, news about our upcoming masterclass series, and lots of other useful information. You can find it at seat.fm. That's www.seat.fm. FM because it's a podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Jane Singer, and I'll see you in the next podcast episode.